Very good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning, Mr. Raab. Just first of all, can you establish for us very clearly from the government's point of view, where are we at with the negotiations between government and those local leaders in Manchester and in Lancashire?
Well, they're ongoing. We're hoping that we can see them through in a collaborative effort. We've obviously got the reserve powers if we need them. We've secured deals with London, Stayt, the mayor there, Steve Rotherham in Liverpool. It's much better if it's a collaborative approach, but ultimately we need to take action. We can't have a situation, as we've seen in Manchester, where Andy Burnham is effectively trying to hold the government over a barrel over money and politics, when actually we need to take action. The cases there are 470 per 100,000, so it's very serious. We must take action in the interest of the people of Manchester and the wider area, and if we take those targeted actions in those areas most affected, we've seen in Elmbridge, my constituency, go up to a higher tier. We all need to follow those rules wherever we are. If we do that, we get through this, we avoid the national level lockdown, which curiously, given what Andy Burnham's saying, Keir Starmer is calling for here in London. So let's put the politics aside. There is a huge amount of good collaborative work between councils and the government. We've seen that in Liverpool, we've seen that in London with Westminster as well. So let's use that as the model, and I would just urge Andy Burnham to do the right thing by the people of Manchester.
Well, quite right. You can say you can put the politics to one side, and yet just a moment ago, I noticed your phrase you used, that the talks are ongoing, which is the phrase you used. We spoke just a couple of minutes ago to Sir Richard Lees, who's the leader of Manchester City Council, and his phrase was, "We're in a bit of a vacuum." He said there are no talks planned for today. In fact, the talks that were scheduled to take place are not taking place.
So I thought you were talking about Lancashire as well, where the
sorry,
talks are ongoing.
I think I said at the beginning. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, you did say at the beginning the wider series of councils we're engaging with, and that's what I was responding to. But look, you're right to say Manchester is dug in. We heard what Andy Burnham said last night. I think, frankly, it's a slightly curious position. I think people both up and down the country, even in Manchester, be surprised. Andy Burnham is saying some targeted measures, albeit restrictive, with all sorts of impacts that we want to try and mitigate with the funding that's been provided. But he's resisting targeted measures in Manchester, whereas Keir Starmer down in London is calling for a 3-week national lockdown across the board. That can't be right. There's a curious political division within what Labour are saying. What we're saying is we take the targeted measures now, we all follow those new rules. We've got to do so here in Elmbridge, we've got to do so in the higher risk areas affected. We do that, we avoid the national level lockdown. The government's taking a balanced approach. We're following the scientists' advice very carefully. It's in the right interests of the people of Manchester that we get this deal done. We want to work with all of the local authorities. We've got a good track record of doing it. I pay tribute to Steve Rotherham, Stayt for working with us on that. I think Manchester and Andy Burnham and the other council leaders should do the same.
I'm aware that we have I think there's a slight time delay, and I appreciate that, so it's a little awkward, but I've come back to the point I made before, which is that we're told by Manchester City Council this morning that there are no talks today. They were expecting there to be talks, and you say you want to engage. They say there's a vacuum right now. So why is the government today not carrying on talks about whether Manchester should go into Tier 3 if that is currently the government position?
Well, I'm not involved in those specific talks, but what I can tell you is very generous offer has been made. We've saved and protected 12 million jobs nationally through the pandemic so far. There have been all sorts of discussions with Manchester. If Manchester and if Andy Burnham is just pulling up the drawbridge and saying we're not going to proceed unless more money is coming in, I don't think that that's an appropriate way to proceed. We've put in a very generous package of support. Obviously those higher risk areas affected will get more support for testing, for tracing, for the for jobs and businesses. That's right. We support all that, but we can't have a situation where Andy Burnham is effectively saying, unless you give us what we want, we're not going to do the right thing in terms of following the new rules which will protect the very people of Manchester that he's elected to represent.
One thing we know certainly because of previous evidence is that time delays spread the infection further and ultimately cost lives. So if it is the government's position that Manchester should be in Tier 3, and we know that delaying decisions will cost lives, Why doesn't the government do it now?
Well, we'll obviously hold in reserve the ability to do that. We've strive with every sinew to work with local authorities, and by and large that's been effective. I've mentioned the areas, London, Merseyside, where that has been effective. We'd like to get there with Andy Burnham and with Manchester, and frankly with all those other areas, including Lancashire. In most places talks are ongoing, but we've got to have a reasonable approach and a collaborative approach on both sides. And you're absolutely right to say that time is important, because we know that the disease is spreading, particularly in those areas. So I think the right response is for Andy Burnham to recognise that the financial package being offered is generous, to follow and work with the government rather than just to pull up the drawbridge. That's the best thing to do for the people of Manchester. And of course, that will avoid, I mean, Andy's right to be concerned, we're all concerned about the impact on local businesses, but it would be far worse if we don't take the action now and we end up in a national lockdown or more restrictive measures locally, which would do more harm. It's very important that we act now, and I would urge all local leaders to show the leadership for which they were elected and join with the government, work with the government. We're providing the support that we can. That's the way we'll get through this.
Is a national lockdown something the government is still actively considering?
We're taking this approach with the tiered approach, medium level, high level, very high level, precisely so that we can take tailored, targeted geographic restrictions, put them in place, work with local authorities, with local leaders to avoid a national level lockdown. Again, I come back to the point, it's crazy, we've got Andy Burnham resisting local targeted
No, I don't want to go back to that point, because it's a point you've made three times now. So what I'll do is, I don't want you to make that point again, because we have made it already. I want to come back to the science, if I may,
well,
and leave the politics to one side for a moment.
Sorry, with greatest respect, with the greatest respect, I'll answer the questions in the way that I deem appropriate. You ask any question you like, but I'm just pointing out that there's obviously a big discrepancy between what the Labour leadership in various parts of the country are calling for.
So I'm going to ask a question now, if I may, which will take us
to try and get us through.
I'm going to ask a question now that maybe take us away from the politics. So, 21st of September, Sage recommended a short circuit breaker, a short lockdown for the nation. The government decided to not pursue that. Why was that decision taken at that time? And did you agree with it? You personally, did you agree with the decision the government took to ignore the Sage advice?
It wasn't a question of ignoring it. We're given a range of options. Sage were very clear. If we take the tiered approach that we're taking, and if we have and can get the support of local leaders, which is why this issue is so important, and if we fully implement them, we can avoid the need for a national lockdown. And a circuit breaker, which is effectively a temporary national lockdown, I think will be more drastic and more damaging for the economy. So it's absolutely right that the government, and I fully support this, tries to take this targeted approach in those geographic areas where the risk is the highest. And if we make that work, and we all rally together, as we've done in the past, to make that work, we can avoid any national lockdown, whether it's indefinite or temporary. And that must be the right thing to do if we can.
It's reported that Jonathan Van Dam said to Andy Burnham in a meeting with local leaders in Manchester that he was of the opinion that a national lockdown was the only way to go.
Well, I've listened to Jonathan Van Dam on countless occasions. I discussed all these issues this week with Patrick Vallance, the Chief Scientific Officer, and the Chief Medical Officer. That is not the advice the government has had. The advice the government has had very clearly is that if we take this tiered, targeted geographic approach, and at the high level areas we see full implementation and really lean into this, we can avoid a national lockdown. And that must be right when you consider the combination of factors, which is getting COVID back under control, but also the economic damage that a national lockdown would do.
If you look at the delays in government decisions, and we look at the timelines here and the facts over the people who had tested positive, the period up to the 22nd of September, 4,926 people were tested positive. The most recent comparable figure, daily UK tests, is 18,980. So that's 5,000 as compared with 19,000 over a period of, 3 weeks. every delay in every decision is costing more lives and infecting more people.
You're making a really strong case for Andy Burnham to work with us, not pull up the drawbridge, so we get this done. But just on testing specifically, which is the subject of your query, we've got the best testing rate in Europe of any major economy, but every country is going through these challenges. We saw Paris this week go into a lockdown with curfews. When I talk to my German opposite numbers, when I just come back from Asia, every country around the world is going through similar challenges, but in Europe you're seeing a real increase in the virus. We do have local level government structures, we want to work with them, but you're absolutely right. One of the challenges with that is getting decisions taken swiftly, and the more swiftly we take the localised action that's necessary, the more chance we've got of avoiding more severe national level lockdowns. That must be the right approach.
Dominic Raab, Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for your time this morning.